No. And the answer to your question is no. I don't now, and I never did. Number one. Number two, I don't believe that ever appeared in Time magazine. And number three, if it appeared, which I very much doubt, it's untrue. Now, in fairness, could I tell you what I said about the blood to Viet Cong? So that you'll know I think you get the quote wrong, but I think that there was something in connection with me with blood for the Viet Cong, and I'll be glad to tell you what it is, so that you'll know the story. I was asked at one time about a year ago. I'd rather not tell you. But I think you're entitled to an answer in connection with that part of it. About a year ago, I was asked about whether I would favor giving blood to the North Vietnamese. And I said that at that time that I would be in favor of it if it was deemed in the government's policy, if it was supported by the United States government, that it didn't violate any law, and that it was used for humanitarian purposes. But the fact that I started out the answer and instead of saying no, I'm against it, unless, which I should have said, I said yes, I'm in favor of it if, and I've been in difficulty ever since. Yes.
Prior to and after the 1966 elections, there's a great deal of discussion about the credibility gap. Now, do you feel that such a gap exists, as most observers do? Do you believe, as most observers do, that the fault lies at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
No.
Both questions.
Yeah, to everything you asked. You were awful nice to ask it, but no. Can I have another question? I'll ask. Yes.
Senator, why did Johnson end graduate school deferment?
The what?
How will this affect those presently enrolled in graduate school?
Why did what?
Why did Johnson end graduate school deferment? And how will this affect those presently enrolled in graduate school?
Well, you're talking about the draft. The president, there were a good number of inequities in the draft. I think everybody recognized that, and the president set up a commission that was headed by Mr. Burke Marshall, who used to be the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Civil Rights Division. They made a study, and they came in with some recommendations regarding the changes in the draft, one of which ended the deferment for graduate students. And President Johnson, I think, accepted most of that report. I think there are a couple of areas where there's still a question which has been left up to Congress, and there'll be some congressional committees which will hold hearings. One has to do with the deferment of college students, and the other, I think that the draft has been very unfair. I think there have been inequities in the draft, and I am against the deferment of college students, particularly, specifically. I was not overwhelmed with the applause. I think a study that's being made now is going to determine whether the deferment, whether if an individual is deferred, whether he can serve his military service, put in his military service after he finishes his period of time in college. I would be glad to study that. My reservation about it at the present moment is the fact that I think with the war going on in Vietnam and the young men being killed and wounded there and serving under very difficult circumstances, I think that burden should be spread across the country into every economic group and to all groups equally. And I think the deferment, the draft deferment for university students creates some inequities. So I would be opposed to those inequities. Can I ask you a question? I'll ask you two questions. One, how many of you would be in favor just flatly of a deferment for college students from the draft? And then I'll ask you how many of you against it. First, how many are in favor of it? Just if you raise your hand. If you raise your hand, those who are in favor of it. And now how many are against it? Now let me just ask girls. How many are, the girls are in favor of it, the draft deferment for boys? And how many are against it? That's going to break up some romances. Excuse me?
We want this straight across the board deferment for all students, regardless of grade point average.
Yes, I'm against it. I said I'm against the deferment for. I wouldn't put it on the basis of how well they do in school or in college. You know, the fact is that the lower economic groups are bearing the burden, by and large, a heavier percentage of the burden of the war in Vietnam. If you just look, for instance, our lowest economic group here in the United States are Negroes. Negroes serve a much higher percentage in Vietnam than they do in the population here in the United States, and the casualties in Vietnam are much heavier amongst the lower economic groups, people who frequently cannot afford to go on to a university, can't afford to go on to a college, such as the Negroes. Much higher percentage. And I don't plan to. Should I ask something?
Question from the audience. Someone asked, from your recent South African trip, what is your prediction for the emergence of South Africa?
What is my prediction? I can't, to tell you the truth. The basic question was the people of Taiwan or Formosa are not basically permitted to participate in their governmental affairs, the people that live on the island, that the government has been taken over and the legislature has been taken over by the Chinese people, who are the vast majority of the population, have no say in what is happening in their country. And the United States is fighting in Vietnam for self-determination. How do we rationalize, or how do we explain our policy in Formosa? And why don't we why do we continue to give money and financial and military support to Chiang Kai-shek when he won't permit the people to participate in their own governmental affairs? And I don't think that there is a satisfactory explanation. I think that the people of Taiwan, the people of Formosa, should have the right to participate, and I think that the United States should make it quite clear to Chiang Kai-shek and to the others that they should have the right to select their own leaders, and that we are very interested in the fact that the people of Formosa, as we are interested in the people of South Vietnam, having self-determination and the right to determine their own destiny. He was aware of the CIA assistance to the student organizations, and under what act were the appropriations justified. The Senate as a body was not aware of it. The watchdog committee that looks over the Central Intelligence Agency was continuously informed about it and gave its approval. The appropriations under which this money was expended was the appropriations for the Central Intelligence Agency, which permits these kind of expenditures.
Senator, as I've seen, there's been no actual concrete suggestion of what might be acceptable.
I cannot give you anything further than what has appeared in the press. What they have said is that they need a gesture, a signal, I think the word is used. And what that signal should consist of, I don't think has been made clear other than in the general terms that you've described it. I can't give you any further information other than what's been.
Senator?
I don't discuss that matter.
One more question.
One, go ahead. 1968, and I'm supporting Fred Harris. Could I ask you some questions just before I leave? We just have a currently withdrawing from Vietnam. And second, how many of you would be in favor of escalating what did I say the second one? Oh, second, how many are in favor of the present policy in Vietnam? And third, how many of you would be in favor of and fourth, how many of you are in favor of ending the bombing of North Vietnam? Let me just ask you a little question. How many of you who are in favor of escalating the war in Vietnam are also in favor of deferment for college students? Could I just say how much? Oh, let me just ask you two more questions. How many of you would be in favor of assuming that there's some stability? Senator Fred Harris, who's not only a neighbor of mine in Virginia, but who sits back almost as far as I do in the United States Senate, and for whom I have the greatest respect. I said that I would explain to the student body and to the people of Oklahoma that, for his own sake, that we don't vote the same way on every issue, for his own future political. But anyway, I have great respect for him, and I'm delighted to have him as a friend. I know what an outstanding career he had here at the University of Oklahoma, and I know what an outstanding athlete he was. He still runs 5 miles every day. I can tell by looking at him. And I'm highly honored to be here at this university who's produced Mike Mulroney, who has been such an effective representative in the United States Senate, and then controversy with J. Edgar Hoover, and then my trip to Europe, then my wife being accused of being a horse thief. So the fact that anybody's still talking to me makes me very pleased. I came down here to sort of get out of the places where they knew me better, so I'm very grateful to see all of you. I feel a little bit like the gentleman who was walking along the street and he saw 2 men struggling with a trunk, and he, being a good Samaritan, he took off his coat and he started to help them with the trunk, and they struggled back and forth, pushing and pulling for a half hour, and so finally he turned to the 2 fellows and he said, "I don't think we're going to be here for 3 months, but the question was that Secretary of State Rusk said that there was a difference between what I suggested on the floor of the United States Senate and the position of the administration in connection with bringing peace to Vietnam. I thought he said, to tell you the truth, I thought he said to the contrary, that there wasn't a great deal of difference. But I think that there is some difference, and I'd be glad to go on.
What I understand is that he said there was no difference.
Yes, that's what I thought. They didn't think there was much of a difference. And what do you want? You want me to say what the difference is?
Newspapers sometimes misinterpret what you say, and I'd like to hear it.
I thought you might ask me something about that. Well, first I'll give you what my position is in connection with Vietnam, and then if it doesn't answer all the questions, I'll be glad to answer further ones in connection with it. I think that we have a commitment in Vietnam, and that we have to keep that commitment, that we have to make the effort, that the commitment goes back a decade, that I thought that mistakes have been made in the past, that I was a member of an administration, and I was involved in the question of the struggle in Vietnam, that I'm sure that administration and President Kennedy made mistakes, of which I was personally involved. So I think that if there's a question of the blame or the responsibility for the problems of Vietnam, there's enough blame to go around for everybody in all administrations, going back from President Kennedy's predecessor through President Kennedy and now at the present time. So I don't think this is a question of finding fault or finding blame for the struggle that we're in Southeast Asia. I support the commitment that we made in Southeast Asia. I support the effort that we're making in Southeast Asia. I think that as General Maxwell Taylor has said, we're not attempting to find a military victory in Vietnam. We're not attempting to have a situation develop similar to the struggle with the Nazis in the Second World War, or on what happened on the battleship Missouri after we defeated the Japanese. That we have limited objectives, according to Secretary McNamara, in South Vietnam. I think that we should do all that we can to bring about those limited objectives. Mr. Kosygin stated in London about 3 weeks ago, repeating the words of the foreign minister of North Vietnam, that if the United States ended the bombing of North Vietnam, the North Vietnamese would be willing to come to the negotiating table. It seems to me that ultimately we're going to have to go to the negotiating table. What I'm in favor of is accepting or taking up the words of Mr. Kosygin and the words of the foreign minister of North Vietnam, accepting those words, saying that we will end the bombing of North Vietnam, that we will be glad to go to the negotiating table, that we will ask an international authority, whether it's the United Nations or a beefed-up ICC, that we will ask them to come in immediately, that they will patrol the area between South Vietnam and North Vietnam, that they will make a report to the American people and to all of the people of the world as to whether the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong are using this period of time to build up their forces in South Vietnam, that we will go to the negotiating table, that we will attempt to reach a satisfactory solution to the struggle in Vietnam, that if we find that the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese are using that period of time just to build up their own forces, that we will take whatever military steps, that we will inform the others that they are not negotiating in good faith, and that we will take whatever military steps we think are not only available but warranted under the circumstances. I think that step should be taken. Now, it's been said that we've made this effort before. I can't promise that they'll even come to the negotiating table. I couldn't promise you that the negotiations would be successful. But I think where Mr. Kosygin, upon which the North Vietnamese primarily rely, when he states publicly and quotes the North Vietnamese foreign minister, they state publicly that they will come to the negotiating